My name is Mara Collins, and if you ask my family why anything goes sideways, a flat tire, a storm rolling in too early, a payment posting too late, there's a good chance my name will be the first explanation offered. They never said Omen out loud when I was a kid. They didn't have to. It lived in the pauses after my mother's sighs, and in the way my father rubbed his temple like a resignation stamp. It lived in my sister's eyes when she missed the turn she thought she owned. I didn't plan on being at the Lakeshore Classic the night it all splintered. I had a quarterly review first thing Monday, and a spreadsheet that didn't balance by exactly 742. But my mother called 2 nights before with a tone that wasn't quite a request. "Sophie needs her whole circle there," she said. "Come early so we can settle nerves." By we, she meant me. By settle, she meant Carrie. The auditorium in Milwaukee felt borrowed from another century. Heavy velvet curtains, brass railings polished by 100 anxious hands, the air salted with hairspray, and the cotton candy sweetness drifting from concession carts. Dancers padded through the aisles in warm-up spines as straight as threats. My mother sat 2 seats in from the aisle, chin lifted, a scarf tied in the perfect knot she wore to every important thing. My father, Glenn, anchored the end of the row with his jacket folded neatly on his lap, as if order could hold back anything chaotic. Sophie was warming up backstage, which meant she was somewhere I couldn't see, and I felt relief in not being part of the final hour rituals. When we were little, she'd asked me to hold her hand before school recitals. By middle school, she asked me to wait outside so I don't catch your bad luck. She softened it with a laugh, but a laugh can also be a blade. The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice smoothed through the sound system. Numbers flickered past a jazz quartet, a lyrical solo that made the row in front of us dab at their eyes with tissues, a trio that cartwheeled into near disaster and back out. Then came Sophie's cue. The first chords of her piece, a slow-burn piano that made you expect falling snow, slid through the dark. She entered from stage right, all lines and breath the kind of presence that made a room shrink and lean in. For the first 30 seconds, she was everything my mother said she was: inevitable. Her turns stacked like vertebrae, her arms carving the air as if the stage had always been hers and merely tolerated the others. And then it wasn't inevitable. On the 4th rotation of a sequence I'd come to recognize from seeing it in our living room between the couch and the staircase, her foot landed a whisper off. To anyone who didn't know her choreography, it was nothing. To anyone who did, it was a pebble thrown into still water ripples she kept stepping into. Applause rose when she finished, generous but not hungry. The scoreboard pulsed with numbers that arranged themselves into 4th place, which is really 1st place in the category of not quite. I felt the air change before the sound reached me. The intake of my mother's breath, the way my father's jaw went careful. Then my mother's voice, sharp and bright, and made to Carrie, cut the row in half. "This is exactly why I told you not to stand where she could see you," she said, not whispering, not performing discretion for strangers. "You put your jinx on things, Mara. You always do." Dozens of heads turned. The people across the aisle, strangers 2 minutes before, were suddenly in my living room. I didn't say anything back. What was there to say? My father cleared his throat like he might intervene, and then smoothed the crease in his pants instead. A handler in a headset glanced toward us, and then away the way people look around a small fire calculating wind speed. I stepped into the aisle, and kept stepping until I reached the lobby, where a glass wall put downtown lights behind me like a borrowed constellation. I pressed my palms to the cool of it, and thought not of leaving. Not yet, but of how tired I was of apology. The door hissed open. For a heartbeat, I thought it would be Sophie, breathless, telling me it wasn't my fault. It was an usher asking if I needed water. I told him I was fine and heard the lie ring. If you want to understand how a sentence like "you put your jinx on things" lands, you have to start in Maple Harbor, Michigan, where the houses wear porches like trophies, and people wave from their lawnmowers. We lived in a salt green 2-story with a tulip bed that never learned restraint. My mother, Diane, organized the pantry with labels and spoke about fate as if it were a train schedule. My father taught high school math and believed in the soothing power of a well-drawn graph. Sophie, the sun in our weather report, took her first dance class at 3 and found the thing that made her a specific person. I found books. The house had a rule. No one wrote down. Results pinned to my sister's wall were framed. Results pinned to mine went into a folder under a stack of cookbooks. When I was 8, Sophie twisted an ankle on the edge of a rug that curled like an old cat's back. I was upstairs trying to learn the difference between stalactites and stalagmites, and by the time I came down, my mother had already decided proximity could be guilt. Mara shouldn't be darting around when your sister's rehearsing. She told the coach on the phone, her eyes looking through me to a future where I was careful enough to be invisible. I wasn't darting. I rarely darted. But once a story is in the air, it keeps retelling itself without help. By 6th grade, I understood how to take up as little room as possible. I set the table before I was asked and scraped my chair in carefully to avoid the sound that made my mother close her eyes. I learned which jokes made my father laugh and saved them up for after dinner when the dishwasher's hum left just enough space for humor to pass through. I brought home report cards with numbers that to me felt like permission. As expected, my mother said, turning back to the email she was composing to a competition director about an unfair scoring rubric. As expected should have been pride. Instead, it was an eraser. Sophie's plaques arrived like holidays, the first blue ribbon, the first titanium star thing the new competitions had started giving. Instead of gold, the first team photo blown up large enough to dominate a hallway. At first, I clapped loudest because she was my sister and she was good. Eventually, I clapped because clapping was a way to cover the sound of the smallness in my body, the one that told me I was the cause of cold snaps and coffee spills, and the day the car wouldn't turn over in the grocery store parking lot. It always happens when you're here, my mother said lightly, which meant not lightly at all. By the time I turned 18, I was fluent in exit routes. The library was the closest, the only public building in town that felt like an apology for everything else quiet, orderly, smelling like something trustworthy. I shelved books there on weekends and found in the Dewey Decimals a hierarchy that didn't change because someone woke up on the wrong side of disappointment. When it came time to apply to schools, I applied to as many as my savings would allow and said yes to the one with the best aid package, Michigan State. It wasn't that I needed to be far. I needed to be unobserved. At college, I fell in love with what numbers could do when they weren't weaponized. Accounting suited me, not the glossy kind with cocktails and agitated clients, but the kind where you reconcile something broken into a thing that balances. I tutored students who were allergic to spreadsheets until they stopped being afraid of them. I stocked grocery shelves at night and wrote notes to myself on receipts because paper felt more permanent than hope. It wasn't glamorous. It was floor joists. Graduation was a borrowed robe, and my father's hand on my shoulder quick and awkward, as if pride were a coat he didn't quite know my size for. My mother took a photo and said, "We knew you'd do well," and I swallowed the way the word "knew" crowded out "saw." I had a job lined up for July with a small firm in Lansing that promised to be steady if not sparkling. Then the firm called in June and said budget reallocations had shifted their timeline. "We're sure you understand," the woman on the phone said, making my life their reasonable outcome. I moved home with a plan that would have made sense on a whiteboard 6 months 9 if rent in Lansing didn't soften a temporary return to my childhood room, with its sloped ceiling and the faint smell of the citrus cleaner my mother favored. The room felt smaller than memory. The bed creaked in a way it hadn't before, and somehow my old desk chair, which had once held me through trigonometry and heartbreak, felt like it resented my weight. Sophie, 29, and still moving like possibility, used the living room like a rehearsal studio, and the dining table like an altar. My mother pinned travel schedules to the corkboard by the door and spoke about choreography as if it were church. My father graded geometry tests at the kitchen counter in the evenings, his red pen moving in neat diagonals, a proof that things could be determined. Bills found their way into a ceramic bowl on the entryway table. Water, electric, internet, a stack thickened like winter ice. My mother would call from the hallway, "Mara, the water is due," as if I were the bank. She never called like that for Sophie. When I tried to say something about ratios, about incoming and outgoing, about how debt isn't a metaphor, my mother smiled with the patience of someone humoring a child and told me not to project scarcity onto success. It sounded like a mantra she'd learned at a seminar I hadn't been invited to. I picked up hours wherever someone would have me data entry for a landscaping company that treated paper like a belief system. Weekend shifts at the copy shop where I learned the smell of toner could become a mood, a temp position at a doctor's office converting paper charts to digital files. The money went where money had to go. I kept a spreadsheet that started because it was my nature and continued because it became a record of choices no one else seemed interested in remembering. $142.39 to Consumers Energy, $86.17 to HarborNet, $312 toward the mortgage my parents insisted was handled, which meant it was sometimes quietly not. When something broke, there was laundry to fold or a corner to stare into. The garbage disposal jammed and my mother stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, asking me if I put something difficult down there, as if knives and pears had souls I was responsible for bruising. If the power flickered during a storm, she'd find me with her eyes first, and then the fuse box. If Sophie froze mid-practice because an old knee flared, she iced it and didn't look at me. Smart people can believe impossible things when those things save them from blame. I tried to become so competent, the house would have to see me. I learned the sound the washing machine made 5 minutes before it decided to stop draining. I kept the Wi-Fi from dropping long enough for Sophie to send an audition tape by moving the router to a spot where the antique hutch didn't interfere. I balanced the checkbook when the checkbook was still a rhetorical device. Every small fix felt like tapping a hairline crack and pretending it was nothing. On Sundays, my father read the paper in full, each section folded into the exact rectangle it arrived in. Sometimes he would look up and ask me something about my work, what a reconciliation actually looked like in practice, why accruals made more sense than cash in certain cases. We talked easily, then a rope tossed between boats. But when my mother entered the room, the rope went slack. He didn't contradict her. He didn't confirm her either. His silence was a shape that filled the doorway and made the room smaller. In September, I landed a junior position at a small firm across the bay in Riverton. The office smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner, and the senior partner had a habit of speaking like every sentence he uttered was the most rational one available. I loved the work. Numbers lined up when you asked them the right questions. They didn't flinch, didn't look for a scapegoat under the nearest table. I stayed late because staying late felt like being inside a room that didn't accuse. When I let myself into the house after dark, the hall light would flick on and my mother would say, "We ate hours ago, making dinner a test I had failed by not taking. If you'd asked me then what I wanted, I would have said quiet, and by that I would have meant the absence of accusation. I wanted cause and effect to stop being assigned by superstition. I wanted my name not to be shorthand for mishap. But want is a soft verb when you live with people who have converted you into a theory. The night before the Lakeshore Classic, my mother ironed Sophie's costume at the kitchen island with a care she didn't waste on anything else. "We'll need you to drive," she said, without looking up. "Your father gets headaches on interstates." "I have a deadline Monday," I said. "We'll be back Sunday night," she replied, as if time rearranged itself for certain destinies. At the hotel in Milwaukee, the air conditioner rattled, and Sophie lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, counting measures with her fingers. She didn't ask me to leave the room, and I didn't offer. We breathed in the same space without touching the same air. My mother taped a note to the inside of the door. "Shoes, tights, pins, music," as if lists were shelter. My father turned the local news on low and sat in a chair too small for him, his knees forming a tent under his hands. What happened the next evening on that old stage wasn't spectacular. It was ordinary in the way most breaking points are. A person you love almost meets the version of themselves they are sure they deserve to be, and then they miss by inches. Someone needs a reason that isn't chance or fatigue or a lack of honest coaching. And there you are, the most convenient reason in the room. After my mother's sentence broke open the space between us, I found a bathroom and stood in a stall far longer than I needed to, staring at the graffiti door where someone had scratched this too. I checked my face in the mirror, not to fix it, but to make sure it was still mine. When I came back out, the lobby had returned to normal. Strangers steered their children toward elevators, and a girl in warm-up shorts practiced turns in her reflection. On the drive back to the hotel, the car felt like a stubborn instrument out of tune. My mother scrolled through scores on her phone, making little disbelieving sounds. My father held the wheel at 10 and 2, as if precision were defense. Sophie sat behind me, breathing in and out, like she'd been instructed to since she was 5. No one asked me how I was. No one apologized for the sentence that had become a family heirloom. I stared at the green highway signs pointing east and west, and thought about how numbers behave when you take them out of context. They still tell the truth. You just have to be willing to read it. By Monday morning, I was back at my desk in Riverton, the smell of coffee doing its tidy work. I opened a ledger that didn't balance and found the error in less than an hour a payment posted to the wrong client, a human mistake with a human fix. I sent an email with the correction and printed the confirmation for the file, then for reasons I couldn't explain. I sat for a full minute looking at the paper as though it were proof of something larger. Maybe it was only proof that living by evidence is possible. At lunch, I bought a stack of plain notebooks from the office supply store and wrote the date on the first page. I began keeping every receipt for money I handed over at home, not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed a version of the story that didn't shift underfoot. I stacked the notebooks in my bottom drawer and went back to work. Outside, gulls wheeled over the river like paper scraps caught in a draft. Inside, I reconciled accounts. At 6, I shut down my computer and walked to the parking garage. The sky was the color of a bruise fading. I had the feeling you get before rain, the heaviness, the metallic taste, the certainty without the lightning. I turned the key. The engine caught. I drove home. By Tuesday, the theater smell had left my coat, but it clung to the week anyway. At the firm in Riverton, I filed a reconciliation that should have taken an afternoon and took me until nearly closing because my mind kept backspacing to the aisle of the Milwaukee Auditorium where my mother's sentence cut the night clean through. I worked, which is to say, I did the part of living that makes sense on paper. Inputs, verifications, adjustments, a line that finally balances and lets you breathe. I stayed late twice and pretended the extra hours were for a client whose name sounded expensive. They were for the part of me that wanted rooms where no one said the word jinx. At home, the house had reset itself to careful. My mother moved through rooms as if someone had chalked new boundaries on the floor. My father read the paper, his glasses low on his nose, as if print could shield him from sound. Sophie reheated soup with the gentleness of a person afraid to wake anything. I kept to my room until the water in the pipes quieted and the dishwasher ceased its low complaint, then went to the kitchen and ate standing up the plate in my hand like a passport I was saving for later. 2 days after the Lakeshore Classic, a group text appeared on my phone titled Family Wins. It wasn't new, my mother had christened it months ago for sharing scores and rehearsal photos and logistics about driving to places with names like Summit or Horizon, but it had been dormant since the weekend. My mother revived it with a link. Read scoring anomalies, she typed, followed by an article from a forum where anonymous parents compared judges like weather systems. Panel inconsistency, the likely cause of several fourth-place results. Sophie sent a heart to the link. My father sent a thumbs up. I typed, "Glad you found this," and deleted it before the dots could appear on their screens and suggest I had a sentence to contribute. The next morning, my mother stood at the counter with a spiral notebook and a pen she only used for what she called big decisions. She was on speakerphone with someone she referred to as Coach Devon, whose name I had learned not to pronounce aloud because I never said it right. "Yes," she said, her voice pitched to serious. "Of course, we are not discouraged. We are focused." She listened for a long time, interjecting little sounds to show she was following, then turned to a clean page and wrote a title in block letters, West Coast Residency. When she hung up, she kept writing words in capitals that landed like ordinations. Los Angeles, 10-day, intensive industry scouts. Private sessions, real footage. She underlined real footage twice. She stared at the page as if it were a window, and the thing she wanted was right there on the other side. Then she tore the page out, smoothed it, and pinned it to the corkboard by the back door where grocery lists and dentist reminders jostled for authority. I made coffee and poured it into a mug I'd bought at the campus bookstore years ago. The handle chipped where a roommate once knocked it against the sink. My mother tracked me like a bead on an abacus. "Coach says the West Coast residency is perfectly timed," she said. "It's not an open cattle call. It's curated. They bring in choreographers who can shepherd the next phase." The next phase of what I asked without heat, as if curiosity were a neutral that wouldn't stain. She blinked as if I'd asked what a door was for. Sophie's trajectory. Sophie came downstairs right on cue, hair knotted at the crown of her head ankle, wrapped in a brace she swore was precaution and not admission. She kissed my mother's cheek, kissed my father's head when he leaned into her reach, then stirred my coffee with my spoon, and took a sip the way she had since we were kids, and she liked anything I already had. "Don't be mad," she said lightly when I took the mug back. She grimaced after the swallow. "Too strong. You always make it too strong." "It's coffee," I said. "Everything with you is concentrated." She smiled, half an apology, half a thought. She knew better than to say. That night, my father fell asleep in front of the local news, with his hand still on the remote, as if vigilance were possible even while unconscious. My mother sat at the end of the couch with the notebook open to a page that was now a column of numbers: tuition, airfare, hotel, per diem, studio rental, for additional coaching. New shoes alterations. The numbers nested duplicated, split into subtotals, as though spending could be solved by dividing it more elegantly. She clicked her pen twice, and not a third time the kind of self-control that looks like virtue in a quiet room and something else in a loud one. "Sophie will need to record new footage on proper floors," she said. Vacuumed Marley reel lighting. "Those clips bookwork." Sophie lay on the rug, stretching the brace off her toes, pointed toward the future my mother drew on paper. "Coach says I should drill turns into the left side again," she said to the ceiling. "My left's fine," she added quickly, anticipating a ghost of criticism and beating it to the corner. "It is fine," my mother echoed a phrase that in our house meant something like, "We will not discuss fragility in front of the fragile." She looked at me. "The schedule is short notice. That's the cost of anything real." I washed the dinner plates and lined them in the rack like evidence, one for each of us, a fourth left to drip longer than it needed to, because my hands wanted to keep being useful. In my room later, I added a line to the ledger in my notebook for the internet bill I'd paid that afternoon, and left the amount blank. I hadn't seen the invoice yet. I had a feeling that didn't require an invoice. A week slid by with the solidity of something that had practiced being a week. I went to work. I adjusted entries. I kept a mental hand on the thread that led me back to the moment in Milwaukee, because letting go of it felt like letting someone else tell me what happened. At the copy machine on Thursday, Krista from payroll said, "You okay? You seem..." She trailed off, searching for an adjective that wouldn't make me into a project. Tired, she settled on. I said I was fine, and for once it wasn't a lie as much as a description of a state we don't yet have a better word for. On Friday evening, my mother asked if I could stop for groceries on the way home because Sophie needed electrolytes that didn't have dye in them. I bought the expensive kind, and the kind that claimed to be superior because it didn't make claims. I also bought toilet paper, paper towels, dish soap, and a bag of coffee that wouldn't be strong enough. I put the receipt in my wallet, and my wallet back into the bag, and the bag on the passenger seat, then sat in the driver's seat for a moment longer than necessary. The car idling the radio, ceding the quiet to my thoughts. Saturday morning, the living room turned back into a studio. My mother rolled up the rug and stood it against the wall like a scolded child. Sophie traced phrases across the hardwood between couch and staircase, marking music only she could hear. She looked like herself again. Even the brace when she wore it seemed decorative, the way a dancer can make a bandage part of the costume if she wants to. My father fixed a hinge on the back porch door and hummed a line of a song he liked in college. The house looked like a family was happening in it. At lunch, my mother brought out a glossy brochure someone had mailed us in a heavy envelope with a return address that did not include an apartment number. The brochure featured photos of dancers, mid-air bodies, pulled into clean diagonals against city skylines, captions in a sans serif font that smiled without trying. Pacific Movement Residency, the cover said, and beneath it, 10 days. 20 mentors, 45 slots. Inside a page titled, Outcomes Listed Credits, in small print, under Headshots Commercials Tours, something on a streaming service I'd heard of, and one I hadn't. This is the one my mother said, and there was no irony in it, only a faith as smooth as a marble floor. How do they choose? I asked, pointing at the 45. They curate, my mother said. Coach sent Sophie's reel already. We're in conversation. Sophie blushed with the kind of happiness you wear like a cardigan because it makes the room warmer for everyone. He said my lines are cleaner this year, she said. He said the stumble didn't look like a stumble to anyone who wasn't looking for me to be perfect. You are perfect, my mother said, without looking up from the brochure. We just need the right eyes on it. That afternoon, I drove Sophie to the studio because my mother wanted to call the residency office without background noise. Sophie twisted the leather wrap of the steering wheel around her finger and watched the road as if it were telling her a secret only she could hear correctly. "You didn't have to get those electrolytes," she said. "They're dumb." "They're not dumb," I said. "You like them." "I like what they promise," she said. "Turns out I like a lot of things for their promises." She smiled at me, then the open kind that made her look younger than 30. And for a second I felt the easy proximity of those old recitals where my job was to hold her hand in the wings and say the words she needed to hear, even if I was only saying them for myself. At a red light, she touched my forearm and then pulled her hand back like the light had turned too quickly to green. "I know Mom was loud," she said. "The other night. She's been louder lately." "She was clear," I said, and kept my eyes on the lane markers. The words made the space inside the car tidy, which is what I needed more than accuracy. When we got to the studio, I waited in the lobby while she checked in. The receptionist had hair like a ballet bun and a sweatshirt that said without irony, "No bad days." A mother I recognized from competitions asked me if I'd seen the post about adjudication rubrics. "There's a movement," she said, and I almost laughed at the word choice, but didn't. She told me her daughter had been robbed of a pre-professional title at nationals, and I told her I was sorry. We were both telling the truth. On Sunday, my mother taped a new list to the corkboard. It was tidy in the way that people who are anxious make things tidy. Dates, flights, hotel tuition, due date, payment method. She'd drawn checkboxes next to each line and filled in none of them, colonizing the future with neatness. At dinner, she set the spiral notebook next to the salt, as if numbers should be seasoned. We ate meatloaf, the recipe with oats that my father liked, and my mother tolerated because it let her feel practical. My father talked about a student who had finally understood proofs, the way certainty can be elegant if you arrange steps in the right order. Sophie described a combination she'd almost perfected, if perfected allows for breath. I asked how the floor felt on turns, and got 2 syllables and a nod, which as dancer for the floor told me a story and I listened. My mother didn't eat much. She moved food around her plate with the concentration of someone playing chess against a clock. After we stacked dishes and the dishwasher started its quiet churn, my mother opened the notebook and clicked her pen exactly twice. She had added a new column, scholarships. 2 lines marked, applied 1 line, marked probable, a 4th line left blank. "I've spoken to the residency coordinator," she said. "They can hold Sophie's slot pending tuition by the end of next week. Flights will be more expensive the longer we wait." She said it evenly, a sentence in the present tense that nonetheless contained a map of what she expected to occur. Sophie put her elbows on the table and then took them off because my mother always said posture matters even in private. "It's a chance to reset the narrative." She said the phrase a near direct echo of something Coach must have told her. "It's not about one panel in Wisconsin. It's about growth." My father reached for his glass of water and set it down without drinking. He looked at me, not in appeal and not in warning, only to register that I was part of this room. It felt for a moment like an admission of citizenship. I nodded and waited. My mother watched my face like it was a page where numbers might appear. She glanced at the notebook and then at me. "We'll need to outline how to cover tuition and travel," she said. Not a question. "I've spoken to the bank about whether we can adjust the second mortgage terms for a month or 2. It's not ideal. Not ideal," my father repeated, and the words fell between us with less weight than they carried. I could see the shape of the budget, the way you see the form of a storm in the distance, not solid, not yet here, but already announcing itself in the particular way trees start to listen. I took a breath and pressed the edge of the table with my fingers until I felt the seam where veneer met wood. Across from me, my mother slid a printed sheet from the inside pocket of her notebook and placed it between the salt and the pen. "Here," she said, "let's look at the numbers." I brought the paper closer. Tuition at the top because it wanted to be. A line for airfare with an asterisk beside it that linked to a note about refundable fares in case of schedule shifts. Hotel at a rate that assumed proximity would cost more and therefore be better. A category for incidentals itemized with the economy of someone who had learned that specifics persuade. Sophie tipped her chair back until one leg considered lifting, then set it down again. My father folded his hands. The dishwasher hummed behind my mother like a second heart. The numbers waited on the table plain and unmagical. I read them the way I read anything that asks to be believed slowly once forward, once back until the story they were telling couldn't be arranged into any other version of itself. I brought the paper closer and read it until the columns stopped pretending to be anything but what they were. Tuition at $5,000. Flights that would jump if we blinked. A hotel rate that assumed nearness meant inevitability. Incidentals that were not incidental at all, coaching hour studio rental shoes that would die after 2 rehearsals on the wrong floor. The total circled twice belonged to a reality my mother believed she could will into softness. "Walk me through this," I said, tapping the tuition line. My voice surprised me by staying level. "What's confirmed on scholarships? 2 are pending," my mother said. She did not say none were secured. "And the second mortgage?" "We're current," I asked, still looking at the page. "We're managing," she said, a word that meant the opposite more often than not. My father shifted in his chair as if he might retrieve a receipt from the air. He didn't. Sophie watched from her side of the table, her hand wrapped around a glass of water like it needed company. The brace had been set aside an amulet she could pick up again if she felt the wrong flicker in her knee. "Coach thinks the residency would sharpen my reel," she said softly. "He says the mentors there change how you move. I don't doubt that I said." I slid the page back to center. "But these numbers don't work. We can't pretend they do." My mother clicked her pen twice. "We're not pretending. We're making choices." I breathed once then again, and decided to keep my words as clean as the columns. "I've covered water, electric, and internet the last 3 billing cycles. The second mortgage payment I sent last month was because the bank called the house phone while you were out. That cleared the late fee, but not the pattern. If tuition is due next week, something else doesn't get paid. That's not a mindset problem. It's arithmetic. You always bring scarcity into a room and call it clarity," my mother said. She spoke to me the way she read directions on a bottle, precise, offended at the suggestion that the contents might behave any way but the prescribed one. "You make everything a ledger." "Because ledgers don't lie," I said, and then wished I had chosen a gentler sentence. "Not soft or gentler." My father cleared his throat. "Let's keep this constructive," he said. "The kind of sentence that belongs to a person who believes tone can persuade facts." Sophie set her glass down carefully as if the table had learned to bruise. "I can't take shifts right now," she said, in a rush, anticipating a request I hadn't made. "Coach has me drilling left turns 6 days a week. If I stop to teach, I'll lock in bad habits." "I didn't ask you to take shifts," I said. "I asked us to look at the numbers honestly." My mother folded her hands over the notebook, as if that could keep the figures from floating into the air and rearranging themselves into a more convenient story. "We are looking honestly," she said. "Honestly, your sister needs this. Honestly, opportunities don't wait for us to balance whatever you think needs balancing." "What needs balancing," I said, "is the mortgage and the utilities and my savings account." I held her gaze. "I won't take on new debt to fund this. I won't co-sign anything. I won't put flights on my card." Sophie's mouth opened and closed, a fish startled by light. "No one asked you to. I'm saying it now so no one has to," I said. My mother leaned back as if distance could grant her the height to look down. Her eyes went cold in a way I recognized from 100 small nights that never made it into family lore. "You didn't want to be at the Lakeshore Classic," she said. "You went and stood in her eye line anyway." "I sat in the seat you told me to sit in," I said. "You were there," she said, as if presence were malice. "You pulled the air wrong. You have always pulled the air wrong." There it was, the sentence that had sat in the corner all evening, waiting to be invited. My father stared at the salt shaker like it might offer him a way out. He did not move toward me. He did not move away. I turned the notebook so the numbers faced my mother again. "You don't get to assign physics to me," I said quietly. "Sophie didn't place where you wanted. That isn't a supernatural event, and it isn't my doing. It's a panel, a program, a night a foot placed half an inch off. It's variance. We can't keep pretending variance is my fault. Jealousy is a shape that thinks it's math," my mother said. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You never could stand the light not being on you." Sophie flinched. "Mom," she said, and then swallowed the rest. Anger came for me, and I let it pass the first time because I was tired of feeding it. What remained was a steadiness I hadn't felt at this table before. "I'm not jealous," I said. I am refusing to be a funding mechanism you don't acknowledge. I am refusing to be blamed for weather. I am refusing to participate in a story where my existence is an error column. The dishwasher hummed behind us, a machine telling the truth about cycles. My mother closed the notebook as if closing it made everything under the cover negotiable. You curse rooms, she said. You turn triumphs thin. You always have. I stood. The legs of my chair scraped the tile, a sound I had trained myself out of for years. Then be in rooms without me, I said. I wasn't dramatic about it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tremble. I spoke as if I were reading a figure from a page. Sophie was on her feet halfway, hands lifted as if to mark through a combination and then abort. Mara, I'm not asking you to agree, I said. I'm telling you the choices I will and won't make. I walked to my room and pulled the suitcase from the closet. It had a scuff from the time I dragged it down dorm stairs because the elevator was stuck between floors. I filled it with the things I've always known: how to choose 2 pairs of work pants, 3 blouses, a sweater for offices that believe air conditioners should intimidate. The notebooks went into my tote spines, stacked like a small spine of their own. I took the mug with the chip because it knew my hand. I left the campus pennant on the wall. I left the frame program from a student recital where Sophie had been radiant and 13, and the audience had stood before the curtain fell. In the hallway, my mother stood with her arms crossed, not barring my way, so much as announcing I was passing through a checkpoint. You will regret this, she said. It sounded like a wish, not a prediction. I might regret many things, I said. I won't regret clarity. She opened her mouth and closed it, a mirror of her daughter's earlier gesture. My father appeared at the end of the hallway, holding his keys like he wasn't sure what the next task would require. He took in the suitcase, the tote the way my shoulder was angled. Do you need me to drive you somewhere? He asked. It sounded like a man trying a sentence on to see if it fit. No, I said, I'm fine. The lie was smaller than the other ones we told tonight. It didn't bother me. Sophie came out from the living room braid, falling apart, eyes bright in a way that wasn't theatrical. Can I say something, she asked, and then didn't wait for permission. I know you bought the electrolytes. I know you paid the internet. I know you moved the router so my upload wouldn't fail. I noticed. She swallowed. I'm sorry I didn't say it out loud. I nodded. It was something like water. Not enough to fill anything, but enough to be real. Outside, the porch light had come on by timer. The tulip bed needed deadheading. The spent petals sat like crumpled tissue at the stem's feet. The evening smelled faintly of rain and the neighbor's laundry detergent. I set the suitcase in the trunk and the tote on the passenger seat. When I turned back, my father had stepped onto the porch. He didn't speak. He raised his hand in a small motion that might have been goodbye, or a blessing, or a habit. I drove across town to Nadia's. She lived on the 3rd floor of a building that used to be a button factory. The hallway smelled like dust and basil. When she opened the door, it was with the face of a person who doesn't need explanations in order to make room. I put my suitcase by the bookshelf and sat on the couch that sagged in the middle. It had belonged to 3 other women before her. The way furniture in college towns earns a genealogy. Do you want tea? She asked. Just water, I said, and she brought a glass big enough to make a person feel held. I drank, and my throat remembered how to do the simple thing without permission. The city moved under the windows, buses sighing, a siren somewhere, a couple laughing too loudly on the sidewalk. Nadia pulled a blanket over the arm of the couch and set a spare key on the coffee table without ceremony. I put it in my pocket and felt its shape press against my leg. I did not cry. I did not sleep. I lay down and watched the light on the ceiling change as cars passed, and I let the quiet be exactly what it was. I didn't sleep on Nadia's couch, but the night carried me anyway. In the morning, she set a glass beside me and a plate with toast like a landing strip. The window looked east. The sky lifted itself without commentary. I showered, pulled on the same blouse I'd folded into the suitcase, and drove to Riverton with the key she'd placed on the coffee table tapping my leg like punctuation. At the office, I opened a ledger and let its order be larger than my thoughts. The numbers behaved. A misapplied payment slid home. An account that had been crooked softened into place. When I looked up, the light through the blinds had changed. I sent 2 emails, printed confirmations for the file, and felt the smallest internal click, a hinge unsticking. I went back that night to Nadia's and found she'd left a clean pillowcase on the arm of the couch. We ate soup at the counter, knees touching, and didn't draw a schematic of what came next because breathing was enough work. By the end of the week, I put a deposit on a studio apartment above a florist on Kincaid Street. The hallway always smelled like damp earth and ribbon. The place itself was a rectangle with a stubborn radiator and windows that took both hands to coax shut. The landlord jangled a ring of keys, showed me how to jiggle the lock, and passed me a paper copy of the lease because paper makes people behave. I bought a second-hand table with a burn mark in the middle, a thrifted lamp that made a lemony light 2 plants that didn't ask for much. I stacked my notebooks on the shelf by the door and set the chipped mug beside the sink as if it were a compass. Work noticed not with speeches, just with the quiet trust of assignments that arrived heavier than before. I took on a client whose accounts had grown fuzzy around the edges. I sharpened them. The senior partner stopped by my desk and said good catch without elaboration. I biked home some days, learned which storm drains flooded in the late afternoon, and slept through the night twice in a row without waking to someone else's sentence in my mouth. Calls came. My father's number first. "Hi, kiddo," he said, and the endearment sat awkwardly between us like a borrowed jacket. "How are you?" "Settling." "I'm okay," I said, and this time the word had shape. He cleared his throat. Your mother's sorting logistics. The internet bill came and the bank. Anyway, the residency is..." He stopped. "If you're helping, maybe send what you can." I sat down at my little table and looked at the burn mark. "If there's an invoice that needs paying, email it to me," I said. "From the provider. I'll pay it directly if I'm able. I won't transfer cash. I won't be on a joint card. That's how I can help." He was quiet long enough that I pictured him nodding. "Right," he said. "Right. Direct is good." Then softer. "I should have said something the other night." "You didn't," I said, which wasn't accusation so much as inventory. "I know," he exhaled. "I'm sorry, Mara." The word didn't fix anything. It didn't need to. It set something down. My mother called 2 days later and didn't say hello. "They've opened a wait list," she said. "If we don't move, they'll think she isn't serious." "That's not how wait lists work," I said. "You're making this adversarial." Her voice turned cool, the one she used with customer service when insisting on a principle. "Send what you're going to send. Forward the statement," I said. "I'll pay the internet company directly, and the physical therapy clinic if there's a balance. I'm not discussing luck. I'm not discussing energy. Only numbers." "You like being cruel," she said, and ended the call as if that proved it. I waited expecting heat to rise in me. It didn't. I opened my email and created a folder called House Receipts and an autofile rule. When HarborNet and Great Lakes physical therapy invoices arrived, I paid them online and saved PDFs stamped paid. I didn't text anyone about it. I didn't write a caption for my life. I made dinner and ate at the scarred table, the burn mark warming under my plate like a secret moon. On Thursdays, I left the office early for an appointment at the community counseling center. The room had 2 chairs that matched and a plant that was somehow always glossy. The counselor listened the way some people hold a door without making a show of it. She said a word in the second session that felt clinical and once named true. Scapegoat. It was a shape I recognized. We didn't dismantle the whole house there. We labeled a beam. Sophie called after 3 weeks. "Hey," she said, as if the syllable could test the depth of water. In the silence that followed, I could hear 2 sounds, an HVAC vent, and the small click of her nails as she picked at polish. "Coach says the left's coming back," she added, because talking about the body had always been the safest language for us. I'm glad I said. I meant it. I saw the HarborNet email she blurted. I got the confirmation too from the clinic. And the studio rental last month, that was... You wasn't it? The invoice came marked anonymous sponsor. She laughed, once a sharp little sound. "Mom thinks it's the universe." "It's not," I said. "It's autopay." A breath from her that sounded like relief held under too long. "I let her make you into the reason," she said, almost too quiet to catch. "Because it was easier than saying I'm scared when I don't hit counts." "I'm sorry, Mar." I put my palm flat on the table, as if I could steady something I couldn't see. "Thank you for saying it," I said. That was enough. We didn't revise history. We didn't swear anything. We stayed on the phone while she boiled pasta and I watered the plants I was trying not to kill, and the line between us felt less like a tightrope than a clothesline slack but strong. My father asked to meet for coffee one Sunday. We chose a diner near the river that hadn't bothered to change its booths since 1984. He ordered pancakes and then forgot them when they arrived. Neutrality felt like doing no harm, he said, watching his fork make a straight furrow through syrup. Turns out it was a kind of harm on its own. I'm sorry I let that be the temperature in our house. He looked older to me in that moment, not in the slackness of his face, but in the way he held his shoulders, as if he had finally set down a bag he'd been willing to carry for someone else. I told him I heard him. He nodded, like there was a bell somewhere we both could finally locate. Spring folded into early summer. My studio learned the shape of me. I bought a second chair from a yard sale and carried it up the stairs by myself, pausing on each landing to grin at no one. Krista from payroll came by with popsicles, and we ate them leaning out the window like teenagers. I took a Saturday shift at the thrift store for fun and found a set of plates that didn't pretend to match. The calls from my mother didn't stop. They changed key. Sometimes she asked about due dates without the ornament of blame. Sometimes she didn't speak, and I could hear a TV in the background audience laughter corralling her breath. I kept the boundary steady providers only in writing. When she slipped and started to say I had knocked a cord from Sophie's spine by standing in the wrong place, I said I won't be part of that, and ended the call. The next time she tried again with just the numbers. In August, Sophie danced in a mixed bill show at a small theater on the east side. The program listed her name without adjectives. Nadia came with me, and we sat 3 rows back on the aisle. My mother and father were their second row center. My mother wore the scarf she wore to important things. It looked less like armor that night, more like fabric. When the lights dimmed, the stage filled with the ordinary sorcery of bodies doing what they have practiced until it looks like luck. Sophie's piece arrived halfway through a trio balanced on a narrow seam of music. She moved with a stubborn grace I knew down to the nail beds, not flawless, not desperate for flawless, just hers. When applause thinned and the lights rose a notch so the crew could reset, she lifted her head toward the house in that old reflex of searching. Her gaze passed over the second row and then landed for a 2 count somewhere near our aisle. I didn't wave. I didn't stand. I sat still and let her see me as if seeing had never been a risky verb. In the lobby afterward, bodies collected their winter coats and pronouns. My mother pressed programs flat with her palms as if preserving them under glass. She saw me and hesitated, as though language were a garment she wasn't sure would meet in the middle. "You're here," she said finally, suspiciously. "I am," I said. She looked at my face the way someone inspects a map searching for a route that doesn't yet exist. "It went well," she said, and the sentence contained only the thing it contained. "It did," I said. My father hugged me in the awkward, sincere way of a man who has discovered hugs late. Sophie slipped through a knot of dancers and rested her forehead against mine for a second, sweaty and radiant. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said back. Nadia squeezed my hand. We pushed through the doors into evening, the air holding that late summer softness that makes even parking lots feel forgiving. I walked home from the bus after the florist downstairs darked my windows a square of light on the second floor. I climbed the steps, let the stubborn lock remind me how to jiggle it, and set my keys in the bowl by the door. I watered the plants. I washed a plate. I logged into my bank account and clicked open 2 emails, one from HarborNet marked paid, one from the clinic balance 0. I dragged them into the house receipts folder and closed the laptop. The radiator ticked. The street below breathed tires over asphalt. I turned off the lamp and lay on the bed in the rectangle of my own making. No one spoke my name like a superstition. The room remained a room. I remained a person in it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If the story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.